Okay, so given what we saw in the first video of Traverse, all about how we track our asset and how there can be an asset that has child assets contained within it, let's now look at how this all came to be. So from the admin page here, you'll see that we have many different maintenance tables. Traverse is very customizable, but it does ship with certain attributes so that you can quickly get started. So for example, in sites, we give you a main site for just startup. So if you don't care about maintaining your sites, you just use that one. We created a fictional site called St. Luke's Roosevelt just because we're focused on a medical type implementation where we're tracking medical instruments and we're using RFID to track them from station to station. Not so much that we're tracking them as they go from station to station, but that each of our assets, let's say a container asset that contains multiple child assets, that all of those child assets retain that parent throughout the course and that they're always present. So again, we've got a default storage location, but we created several other locations for this demo. Those are location types. So then when you look at locations, you'll see we created this location. It happens to be the sterilization station, and there's a capacity, and perhaps capacity for a sterilization station is irrelevant, but it's there. It's probably more useful for a stock room, let's say. Okay, and you could break your stock room for that matter up into several storage bins and label each of those storage bins with a location label. It doesn't have to be just the stock room. You could take this as granular as you like. So that's all about sites, buildings, and locations. And that's so that you could have multiple sites within your Traverse implementation, and you also could have a campus with multiple buildings. It's just a way to break down where your items are physically. But now let's go look at let's go look first how we categorize some of our items. So there's a table called category codes. It comes empty, and we just created some sample category codes that might make sense for this application. Again, you can create your own category codes that make sense for what you want to do. Similarly, so we've got ENT, sinus, plastic. We were breaking down the different types of medical instruments. Then you could have class codes, and within each class code, you could then have the different, a broader type of instrument, but not necessarily, there could be many different chisels that are categorized under chisels heading. So it's a way of grouping your items together so that you could search for them or report on them. But the heart of Traverse is all about the asset types. So here we created several asset types, and here's a stainless steel pan, right? And within pans, you notice how it can be a container, right? Because you could put other assets within it, perhaps even a smaller pan. You could also put instruments inside. So you see how it can be contained within another pan, if you wish. If you don't, uncheck this box. Optional fields. So these are the standard optional fields that come with Traverse. And they're very typical of what assets are out in the real world. But then we give you custom fields. And with the custom fields, you can then decide, what do I need to know about my assets? So, do I care about what it looks like, dimensions, the gauge of the metal perhaps, what kind of decontamination method we use? But here's a very important attribute about our asset, and it is whether sterilization has passed or failed. And you notice how we collect it on an in transaction. We could also collect it on an out transaction, but we chose to do this demo this way. Similarly, if we pick another item, let's say a knife or blade, you see how this one is not a container, but it can be contained within other items, and it also has sterilization failed, and that's how we were able to collect that particular true false when we checked in the item. So this is, this is key. But what really makes Traverse stand out, because you could, if you wanted to, you could nest your child and parent relationships, as deep as you like. I think we'll let you go up to 20 deep. So you could have a pan within a pan within a pan, and then have knives in there if you so chose. I mean, just however you want to structure your data. But then we can let you set up relationships. And here's where we go above and beyond most asset tracking systems. Like most of those systems you would find that use Access as the back end, or perhaps FoxPro. We're using SQL on the back end. Everything here is really structured. And you see the pans? Well, now inside of our pans, we're saying, okay, you can store clamps, knives, scissors, tubes. If we had more asset types, you could add them to the list. But you notice also that we're not letting you put pans within pans. We could do that. It really is a matter of how you want to structure your data. Similarly, I say that a lot, don't I? If we look at scissors can be contained by pans and trays, but you notice since scissors are not a container, this side of the list is not present. So that is how we set up our assets. So, when you download Traverse, you first have to do some setup. You have to create the asset types that you're going to use and the relationships. You have to give it some thought. But once you've done that, then you can enter your assets through the physical inventory module, or you can just create them using the asset creation module. Of course, that's a one-on-one type creation. In other words, I'm going to add one asset at a time. You could also import them. We could show you how to do that. If you've got an Excel sheet or comma separated values, or perhaps an XML file, you can import them. But then, of course, you've got to get your asset tags assigned, and that's the real trick. So if you're using RFID, for example, those RFID tags, we need to uniquely identify each asset with its tag. So that would be a little bit more challenging, but we could show you how to do that. Now, recall on our first demo that we had a notification. Not only did we check in an item and it failed sterilization, but then we checked in the whole group of those items. They failed sterilization, but then we got an email about that, and that is set up right here. So I've set up a notification, and you see it's just uniquely identified. I mean, that's not important. But what is important is that we told it on a check-in for this particular asset type, if sterilization, we're going to check this sterilization failed field, and if it's true, that's when we're going to send out the notify. I happen to pick my personal email account. This way it didn't go to my business email account, and it doesn't matter. That's just the way I set it up. That was the subject. That's the browser message that you saw on the first page. And then this would be the body of the email, along with some other information that we added on to it. And that's it. And then, of course, to set all that up, when you first download Traverse, the very first thing you have to do is set up your system configuration. So you have to put in a company name or your individual name if you're an individual. And you'll have to, I'm not going to go to the SMTP info because I don't want to display my user account information. You should set up the archive and purge intervals, and let me explain what that means. That means right here, the way we set it up, after any transaction that's in this system, after 6 months, it moves to history. We have historical tables that mirror our active tables. And any transaction that's more than 4 years old, we then purge out of history. Or you can set it up by the number of rows. This particular installation is using SQL Express. So 500,000 rows is probably a good number to use. If you were using SQL Standard Edition or SQL Server Enterprise Edition, you can make those numbers much larger. And then what it would be is, if the transaction is 6 months old, or if we've got 500,000 rows in that transaction table, whichever comes first, that's when we'll decide to move it off into history. And similarly, we'll do the same for the purge. We've got some other configuration values, and these probably don't pertain to this particular implementation, but as you can see, we allow you to search for UPC codes, and we can demonstrate that in another video. You can use GUIDs as your asset IDs. There are pros and cons as to why you wouldn't do that, but we allow you to do it if you choose to. And pretty much that's it. You could enter departments. We didn't enter it here. We didn't create any. But again, any of the tables that you fill along this list is just another way for you to search for your assets when you're reporting or when you're searching for them. For example, even if I go to Home and type autoclave. Oh wait, it's probably not found. See, I hit AutoCL and I found a bunch of items. Or I could type in forceps, if I spell it right. Wow, I'm really not spelling it right. And there's all the forceps that I have entered into my system. And you can pick any one of them. It'll take you right to the asset page. Notice how we just use sequential numbers for our asset IDs. It really depends on how you implement. And like I said, if you're using RFID, it's very likely that those tags already have an ID associated with them, and you're gonna, when we build you a special module to create your assets, you will let's say put 20 or 30 tags in an area that can be read by your portable reader, and you'll pick a type, and then it'll automatically generate your 20 or 30 assets of that particular type, and they'll each have their different ID. So that would just be an external module outside of what Traverse ships with. But these are very simple customizations that we can make for anybody. So this is the end of this demo. The next demo focuses on reporting and a very cool feature of Traverse, which is the audit trail.